Picture earning $30 million in a single year. Now picture borrowing money to buy your own kids a Burger King meal. That is not two different people. That is the same man, T-Pain, less than a decade apart. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Going broke after selling millions of records does not happen by accident. It takes effort. It takes a very specific kind of decision-making made over and over by men who genuinely believed the money would never stop. So I went looking for the pattern. I pulled the bankruptcy filings, the IRS judgments, the foreclosure notices, and I lined up 10 of the biggest names in hip-hop who had it all and torched it, not through bad luck, through choices so reckless they almost look like a strategy to lose. What I found is the same mistake, wearing 10 different faces. This is the anatomy of how you turn a fortune into a courtroom. We are starting at the bottom and working toward the worst of them. We begin with Exhibit. You remember him from Pimp My Ride, the show where he turned beat-up cars into rolling sound systems. And there is something almost cruel about that. The man whose entire brand was fixing other people's busted rides could not keep his own finances running. By 2013, Exhibit filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His paperwork listed roughly $900,000 in delinquent taxes. His monthly income had collapsed, but his lifestyle had not. That is the gap that kills you. When the checks slow down and the spending does not, math takes over. And math does not care that you were once on MTV every afternoon. And this was not a one-time stumble. Exhibit filed for bankruptcy twice. The first time, the second time, same root cause. The income from the show and the records had a shelf life. The Range Rovers and the property did not come with an off switch. And here is why I started with Exhibit. His mistake was not dramatic. There was no Bugatti, no mansion full of tigers. He simply kept living like the income was permanent long after it stopped being permanent. Boring, quiet, fatal. And it is the most common way these stories actually begin. Nobody films a documentary about a man who slowly overspent for 10 years. But that slow overspend has bankrupted more rappers than any single luxury purchase ever has. Hold on to that, because it is about to happen again and again. From there, we move to Bow Wow. Bow Wow was a child star. He was selling platinum records before he could legally drive. And that is exactly the problem. Nobody hands a 13-year-old a wealth management seminar. In 2012, reports surfaced that Bow Wow's liquidity had collapsed almost completely. He later admitted on camera that the private jet photos he posted online were staged. The jet was a stock image. He was actually flying commercial. Sit with how strange that is. He was so broke he had to fake being rich on the internet to protect the brand that was supposed to be making him rich. And here is an opinion that will annoy a lot of people. I do not actually blame Bow Wow for faking it. He was a kid handed an adult fortune by an industry that profits from his ignorance and then walks away when the well runs dry. The staged jet was pathetic, sure, but it was also the most honest thing about the whole machine that built him. That is the trap of a child star with no second act. The income was front-loaded into his teens. The expenses kept arriving like he was still on top. And when you are famous for being rich, admitting you are not rich feels like career suicide. So he faked it. The flex was a lie holding up a brand that was already hollow. Which brings us to Lil Kim. Lil Kim helped define an entire era of hip-hop. Queen Bee, the blueprint for a generation of female rappers. But by 2018, she was filing for Chapter 13 bankruptcy and staring down the foreclosure of her New Jersey mansion. The numbers were brutal. She owed millions across back taxes and unpaid mortgage debt. Her home, once a symbol of everything she had built, became the anchor dragging her under. Chapter 13 is the version of bankruptcy where you keep your assets but commit to a court-supervised repayment plan. Translation? The court now decides how you spend your money. Here is the deeper lesson buried in Kim's story. Legendary status does not pay a mortgage. Cultural impact is not legal tender. You can change music forever and still lose the house, because the bank does not accept influence as a currency. Kim had the legacy. What she did not have was a system underneath it. Then there is Young Buck. Young Buck was signed to G-Unit. He was inside one of the most powerful rap machines of the 2000s, standing right next to the man who will show up later on this very list. And it still was not enough. In 2010, the IRS raided Young Buck's home over unpaid taxes. Agents carted out his belongings, furniture, electronics, the contents of a successful rapper's house, hauled away in front of the cameras to settle a debt to the government. He reportedly owed around $300,000. To settle the mounting debt, he was eventually forced to do the one thing an artist should fight hardest to avoid. He sold off the rights to his own music catalog. Think about what that actually means. Your catalog is the asset that keeps paying you for decades. It is the closest thing a musician has to a pension. Every time a song streams, plays on the radio, or gets licensed for a film, the catalog owner gets paid. When you sell it under pressure, you are not just losing today's money, you are selling every future paycheck that catalog would have generated at a discount to a buyer who knows you are desperate. The desperate seller always loses. Young Buck did not just go broke. He sold his future to survive his present, and being signed to one of the most powerful labels on earth could not save him from a tax bill he simply never planned for. Consider Nelly. Nelly was everywhere in the early 2000s. Country Grammar, Hot in Here. He moved more than 20 million albums, and then, years later, the public learned he owed the government roughly $2.5 million in federal taxes, plus another $150,000 in state taxes. Here is what is strange about Nelly's case. He was not flat broke in the dramatic lost everything sense. He was asset rich and cash poor, buried under a tax bill that had been quietly compounding for years. This is the silent killer that runs through almost every name on this list. It is rarely the cars. It is rarely the jewelry. It is the taxes. Income tax on money you already spent. When you earn millions, you owe a massive percentage to the government before you touch a dime. If nobody sets that money aside, the bill does not disappear. It grows. Penalties stack. Interest compounds. And one day the letter arrives and the number is bigger than anything you have left. Nelly's fans helped bail him out by streaming his old albums on purpose. That is how close it got. Let me stop the countdown for a second because I need you to see what I saw when I laid all this out. 4 names in: Exhibit, Lil Kim, Young Buck, Nelly. Different cities, different eras, different sounds, same enemy. And it is almost never the thing you would guess. It is not the chains or the cars in the driveway. It is the invisible bill, the one that compounds in silence while the artist is on stage thinking the hard part is over. I went into this expecting to find 10 stories about greed. What I actually found was 10 stories about the same blind spot. The hard part was never making the money. The hard part is what happens after. So hold that thought because the top 5 did not just make this mistake. They turned it into an art form. That brings us to Ja Rule. Ja Rule sold nearly 20 million albums. Then between 2004 and 2008, he simply did not file his tax returns. Not once. On more than $3 million of income, he filed nothing. In 2011, it caught up with him. He was sentenced to 28 months in federal prison for failing to file, owing the government over $1 million in tax losses alone. And years later, the IRS came back with a lawsuit claiming he and his wife owed more than $3 million across a decade of unpaid taxes. But Ja Rule did something the others did not. He went broke twice in 2 completely different ways, and the second was so reckless it became a Netflix documentary, The Fire Festival. He co-founded a luxury event that promised supermodels and private villas in the Bahamas and delivered disaster relief tents and cheese sandwiches. Investors and ticket buyers lost millions. His partner went to prison for fraud. Ja Rule walked away from the criminal charges, but the financial and reputational wreckage was total. Most people get 1 catastrophic money lesson. Ja Rule signed up for 2. And now the cases that should have known better. Start with DMX. DMX was one of the rawest, most commercially dominant rappers who ever lived. 5 #1 albums in a row. That is a record almost nobody can claim. And he died in 2021 with a net worth estimated at -$1 million. Negative. After all of that. DMX's poison was taxes, layered with chaos. From 2002 to 2005, he racked up roughly $1.7 million in unpaid federal taxes. Instead of fixing it, he built an entire system to dodge it. He lived in cash. He refused to keep a personal bank account. He had royalty checks funneled through other people's accounts so the IRS could not trace the money. He was, in the words of the prosecutor, systematically cheating on his taxes. In 2013, he filed for bankruptcy listing about $50,000 in assets against millions in debt. One of the best-selling rappers of all time declaring $50,000 to his name. And in 2018, the strategy finally collapsed. He was sentenced to a year in federal prison in order to pay over $2 million in restitution. Before he walked into that courtroom for sentencing, he asked the judge if he could perform one of his songs. He did. Then he went to prison. DMX did not lose his money to one bad purchase. He lost it to a worldview, the belief that if you just refuse to engage with the system will eventually leave you alone. It never does. It just adds interest. And when he passed away in 2021, the accountants did the final math. negative $1 million. A man who generated hundreds of millions in revenue across his life left this earth owing more than he owned. Then there is 50 Cent. And this is where my whole theory nearly falls apart, because 50 Cent is supposed to be the smart one. He sold a stake in vitamin water and reportedly walked away with a fortune. He built businesses. He was the rapper who turned hustling into a brand. Fans love to point at him as proof that the smart ones survive. I think that misreads him completely. And in 2015, he filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing around $32.5 million in debt. How? Lawsuits. A jury hit him with a $7 million judgment in a sex tape case. He was tangled in a $17 million dispute over a failed headphone venture. The legal bills stacked faster than even he could absorb. At the time, his net worth had been estimated north of $150 million. But here's the twist that separates 50 from every other name here. He did not file bankruptcy because he was actually broke. He filed Chapter 11, the reorganization version, the kind corporations use, as a strategic move. It froze his debts. It stopped the lawsuits from bleeding him in real time, and it gave him a court process to negotiate the payments down to something manageable. He reportedly settled the whole thing for a fraction of what he owed and exited bankruptcy in under 2 years, even paying off the plan early after winning a separate legal settlement. So why is he on a list of people who lost it all? Because while he was legally telling a court he could not cover his debts, he was posting photos on Instagram stacked with bundles of cash, once even spelling out a word on his bed using the money itself. A judge actually summoned him to explain it. He claimed the cash was fake, prop money. Whether it was real or not, the lesson is the same. He turned public humiliation into a chess move, reckless on the surface, calculated underneath. The one man here who looked like he was drowning and was actually swimming, the exception that proves the rule, which leaves the two worst. And the second of them is MC Hammer. Before there was a blueprint for losing it all, there was Hammer. He is the original, the cautionary tale every other name on this list is unknowingly repeating. In 1990, Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him sold over 10 million copies. Forbes ranked him among the highest paid entertainers alive, with earnings around $33 million in a single year. He built a $30 million mansion in California with gold-plated gates and Italian marble, and then he hired everyone he had ever met. At its peak, Hammer's entourage hit around 200 people. His monthly payroll alone was roughly $500,000. That is $6 million a year just in salaries before he bought a single thing for himself. $500,000 walked out the door every month for a small army of dancers, bodyguards, and friends with job titles nobody could define. He bought racehorses, building a stable that held 19 of them at its peak, 2 helicopters, a private jet. Maintenance on the house alone reportedly ran $500,000 a year on top of everything else. By 1996, it was over. Hammer filed for bankruptcy with around $13 million in debt against assets that had evaporated. He sold the gold-gated mansion, which had cost a fortune to build, for a tiny fraction of its value. He had gone from $33 million a year to negative 13, and the bill did not even stop there. Years later, the IRS came knocking again for hundreds of thousands in taxes dating back to those glory years. Hammer did not get robbed. He did not get sued into the ground. He simply spent like the music would never stop. And the music always stops, which leaves the worst of them, T-Pain. And we are back where we started, the man who borrowed money for a Burger King. In the mid-2000s, T-Pain was untouchable. He was on 9 top 10 Hot 100 singles at the same time. His auto-tune sound defined an entire decade of radio. He estimated his peak fortune at around $40 million. Then he spent it like the well had no bottom. He bought a Bugatti for $2.1 million, drove it, lost interest, and sold it for $800,000. A $1.3 million loss on a single car he got bored of. He bought mansions on impulse, including one connected to his own house, just so he could build a private path between them. But here is the single most damning detail in this entire video. T-Pain never checked his bank account, not once. He has said it himself. He assumed the royalty checks would just keep arriving forever, so he never looked at the balance. He trusted his team completely, and his team, knowing the money was running out, deliberately kept him in the dark, because the moment he found out he was broke, the gravy train ended for all of them. So they let him keep spending. They watched him buy that Bugatti with what turned out to be nearly the last of his money, and they said nothing. He found out he was broke only when someone outside that circle finally whispered the truth in his ear. By 2019, it was foreclosures, bankruptcy, and borrowing cash to feed his children. He lost a home in Florida to the bank. The most successful pop rap artist of his era, a man with diamond certified records and a sound that rewired radio, blindsided by his own ignorance and the very people he paid to prevent exact exactly this. To his credit, T-Pain is one of the few here who clawed his way back and now talks openly about money, which is exactly why his story sits at the very top of this. He did not just lose it, he understood why. And the why is the most important sentence in this video. He never looked. So what do all 10 of these men actually have in common? It is not stupidity in the way the internet likes to laugh about. It is something more specific and more human. Every one of them believed the peak was the new normal. They treated the single biggest year of their lives as the baseline for every year that would follow. And the tax man never forgets. The catalog you sell never comes back. The team you do not watch will watch you go broke. The mansion you cannot afford sells for pennies. Here is my prediction, and watch for it. The next decade is going to be even more brutal than this list, because today's biggest stars are paid in streaming royalties and crypto and equity deals. Things that look like wealth but can vanish overnight. The Bugatti at least had a resale value. A wallet full of a collapsed token has nothing. The names change. The mistake does not. And somewhere right now, a brand new artist is signing a deal, looking at the biggest number he has ever seen, and quietly deciding it will last forever. It never does.